Who was a ringleader?
Are we recording?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Right, back to you, Ben, on question 19. And if we could just orientate ourselves in your reply. So that's page 22. The reply.
Sorry?
22. Thank you. The question around to what extent does the spatial plan need to address large-scale developments, particularly supermarkets and retirement villages? So two-part answer here. With regard to supermarkets, the spatial plan does not need to go that level of identifying the location beyond the broad location shown. The NPSUD requires an assessment whether any identified development capacity for business land is suitable for different sectors. At a minimum, though, that includes suitability in terms of location, site size. Considerable additional work would be required to provide the level of granularity for addressing the projected demand for supermarkets, and understanding demand of supermarkets would be needed to determine whether there is sufficient development capacity. I guess that demand is probably best provided by supermarket industry, but as I mentioned, their submission tends to follow where the growth might otherwise go. And the draft spatial plan is at a scale where discretion and flexibility is afforded within the broad locations, and in providing that focus, that growth can occur in other locations, but at that broad location, spatial plan provides a focus for partnerships and investment as to where they're looking to focus that growth, which can help give some confidence to the industry around where to focus, but growth can still occur elsewhere. In terms of retirement villages, officers recommended the spatial plan be amended to better reflect the spectrum of housing choice, whether that's specific forms of housing, alternative approaches, including retirement villages, and the Joint Housing Action Plan extends to this full spectrum of housing choice to consider that. And again, the spatial plan identifies the broad locations for where housing development opportunities could potentially be taken up, and that extends to retirement villages, again, giving some direction, confidence of where partners and investment may look to occur to try and drive that growth. Again, it can occur elsewhere.
Can you just take us to where the recommendation is? First bullet point under retirement villages, Ben.
Yeah, there's a broad recommendation about specific forms and alternative approaches to housing. It's on page 72 of the officers' report, the original officers' report, not the response to questions about specific forms and alternative approaches to housing.
So where in the document attached with this report is that change highlighted?
Sorry, do you mean in terms of the question, the reply document?
I'm just saying that you've recommended that the draft spatial plan be amended. I want to just eyeball the amendment you've made. Where is it?
Which, I'm asking, is that in the officer's reply or in the markup?
So, just so clear, Ben, I've got in front of me the report you've delivered today, which attached to that is a second markup of the spatial plan. That's what I'm focusing on, because that's our latest advice from you. So I just want to understand where that amendment is so I can have a good look at it. Is that on page 68 by chance? The track changing there, is that what you're referring to?
So it's the bottom of 66.
66.
Sorry, yeah, bottom
Yeah.
of 66.
And over to 67.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Any questions on this on the panel?
Sorry, on that amendment then, does it specifically refer to retirement villages as a, or are you leaving it open?
No, it doesn't specifically refer to retirement villages in the recommendation to add that section to the spatial plan. Officers are of the opinion that specific forms, alternative approaches to housing would include intentional communities, retirement villages, lifestyle villages, and that's in the officer's report in the body of the text, but not specifically mentioned in this amendment to the spatial plan. It does take the MPSUD description of forms of housing as different to type and typology. So it is related to that, where it mentions seasonal accommodation, workers' accommodation, and would infer retirement villages.
Okay.
So-
Panel,
Begs the question then whether there's any harm in it, but
Well,
it's the floodgates and where do you start and where do you stop? Because there's also intergenerational living, which is something we're keen on as well. So I don't know the answer.
I think the panel will just look at the wording when we deliberate and just see if there's any clarification, Liz. The reason I think for me, speaking aloud, is retirement village form of housing is such a big part of our future. It's growing. I can't particularly see any harm about sort of identifying that as a specific form that's important and supported, but let's just look at it, the wording ourselves.
Yeah, I'd just add that the specific forms or alternative approaches to housing is a really broad church, and you could capture things such as intergenerational housing and co-housing, and then we could write a list of different alternative forms of housing and envisage ones that haven't manifested yet. It's the idea that there's, rather than what the market typically provides, there's other ways of providing housing, and we could specifically you could specifically list them, but it might be quite an extensive list. That's just something I'd add.
Can I just add through you, Chair, that it's about the end user and the effect that this document has for people. They need to be able to see themselves in it. They need to be able to read it and understand it and identify how and where it relates to them. So look, I'm happy to discuss it when we're deliberating.
Yeah, I think that the team's right that second sentence covers the broad church. We'll just have to make sure that people reading this that aren't planning geeks can understand what we're talking about there. So we'll note that in our form, but I don't think there's any further questions about the arts, and that's really helpful. Updating, relating it back to the MPSUD definitions. Move on, I think.
I just that probably should have retained at the start that the markup version you have provided recently with the reply has the recommendations made in response to questions highlighted in yellow.
Yes,
Everything else remains.
Yeah, that's why we're using it.
Yeah,
I think it's our master reference.
Yeah.
Section 24.
Yeah, so now we're into back to the order of things in terms of the officer's reply. So this starts at page 2. Now we'll flow through the order in relation to that reply. So the question here was around what's the role of what role has Kiwi Rail played? To acknowledge that Kiwi Rail does have a close relationship with the partners, and they were identified stakeholder and participated in the early engagement, including a meeting in early 23 on the spatial plan for Hui Hui Mai, and that engagement informed the development of the spatial plan. We know though in the discussions that they're aware of the MRT and they're interested in how it overlaps with regional rail discussions in particular. But for the spatial plan, they were engaged early and did participate in stakeholder meetings.
What can anyone help me with? What's the view of use of heavy rail into the next 30, the 700,000, 1 million people greater Christchurch? Are they open to that, or are they a closed mind that this is really a freight line only?
My recollection of the comments were that they were open-minded. They understood that it was looking to be an increase in passenger rail. Emma, if you've got any other insights on the MRT discussions.
Yeah, I think the engagement with Kiwi was positive. I mean, they haven't provided a submission, but from our engagement and development of the MRT ABC and spatial plan, they were positive and engaged about the planning for that future. The basis of the spatial plan is that MRT and the preferred corridor of the city street running preferred option. And I think they were supportive of some of the options why Kiwi Rail was ruled out for the key MRT spine. So I think they would be, without speaking in turn of them not making a submission, I think we have a good relationship and good engagement with them on this ongoing future.
Right.
And I don't know which page it is, but there's a good commentary from the work on the work that to another question about the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee.
It's quite a long answer, yes.
Yeah, and some consensus and forward work investigation.
Yes.
Into passenger rail.
Yes.
Or rail in general, really.
So this is like a factual position. There has been engagement. We've heard that they seem to have an open mind, Emma. So let's move on to the more detailed questions.
Moving on to the next question too, in relationship to other processes. Is there flexibility to absorb potential changes in HPL definition and officers' view is yes, there is. The approach to protecting highly productive land in the spatial plan is set out in direction 3.4, and that is sufficiently flexible. We're aware that MFE and MPI are looking at some changes in relation to quite specific natures around infrastructure and intensive indoor farming production. That's a process underway now. And the National Party has alluded to signalling changes around just incorporating LUC 1 and 2. So we're aware of those happening in the background. There's nothing solidified around them. Direction 3.4 talks about with some exceptions, so it does provide that flexibility. And we note further that the spatial plan has to be had regard to. If there are changes to national direction and policy statements, for example, then that has to be given effect to and trump those changes. There are other changes as well to the maps, trying to map 12, and reflecting that it's an indication of LUC 1 to 3, not highly productive land, recognising that determination of what is HPL will occur through the RPS and giving effect to the national policy statement. The officer's view is they're not locked in and there's flexibility.
Questions, panel? No, thank you. Oh, Grant.
Sorry, on that last paragraph on page 3 there, you mentioned recommendation that the text under direction 3.4, page 65, just turn to page 65, but is that the correct page? That doesn't,
Yeah. So the recommendation amendments are when it's referencing page numbers for amendments, there's amendments to the draft and the page numbers there. When we've put them into the markup version, they will be different pages. We have to reflect them notified version.
okay. Thank you.
So I'll tell you what page it is if you give us time. So just
Page 58. Okay. Yep, I see that there, page 58.
yeah, apologies, I missed that on my slide. That recommendation.
Panel, we're comfortable with this? Thank you. We'll move to the next question.
You're staying with that theme of relationship with other processes. Question 18, are the maps similar vein? Are the maps locked in? And is there flexibility? So the maps, no, the maps are not locked in. As a spatial plan only has to be had to regard to. There is a change to figure 5 on page 20, a recommended change to figure 5 on page 24 that previously recommended, that seeks to show the flow chart there that those other processes will be in the spatial plan will inform other processes, not give effect to. So again, around that, have regard to provide some flexibility that there could be changes beyond the spatial plan. So a lot of the maps, particularly around hazards, are accurate in terms of the GIS level. They are potentially in district plans now, but they may change as new information comes to light or other plan changes are developed in the future. So it's a guide for constraints. Related to that is question 6. Now in the officer's reply, that's under another theme. It comes on later on, but it is probably relevant to this point as well, around if there are significant future changes through the RPS review, there's the opportunity to review the spatial plan further down the track. So again, around that flexibility, and the answer is yes. There's a commitment to review it every 5 years in full, and officers have again recommended in the initial officer's report that there is clarity that the FDS component is reviewed every 3 years as well, and there's nothing stopping other reviews happening in between those times should new information come to bear.
Okay, I'm clear on that. Any other questions?
No, just clarify, just confirming that the you referred to figure 5, page 24 of the draft spatial plan, but under your officer's report, it's on page 17.
Ask the officers in the background to keep a track of those page numbers. Thanks.
All right, we're moving now to question 10.
So the question around do the numbering of opportunities have a reflect a hierarchy? No. The opportunities and directions and key moves, they work together to represent a principal way, sort of close the gap between current state and future state. There's not one priority over the other.
Is that stated clearly in the spatial plan anywhere, Ben?
Well, I don't think it is, to be honest. There was some submissions on it which we responded to in the officer's report, but no, we didn't provide any further clarity.
It's an obvious thing about wires. You know, is there any ordering or hierarchy? And I think we might look at the wording and make sure that it's crystal clear that what you're saying is on the face of the plan. You got that, Liz?
Yes, you're thinking of a footer on those pages to just indicate to people.
Well, just it's an obvious thing, like how you order opportunities. Quite often people take not offence, but they just assume that if they're number 5 or 6, their thing is not as important.
Yeah.
I certainly understand what the officer's saying. They're a combined menu, no hierarchy. They all work together.
Yeah, correct. Just in relation to the theme of scope of the plan, the question 7 around the extent of the spatial plan and how far it reached in terms of the coast and ocean. So map 1 of the draft spatial plan shows the extent, and it's provided there on that presentation. And the boundary is landward of the coastal marine area. The focus, so it doesn't extend into the ocean. The focus of the spatial plan is the urban environment. The blue-green network would include coastal areas and waters in terms of its consideration. It is potentially nothing to stop future regional strategies under the Spatial Planning Act if it occurs, or other iterations potentially that could go further. But the focus is very much the urban environment.
I'm sensing we carry on. Thank you.
Themes around the opportunity to, particularly managing risks. There were some questions around what extent does map 5 affect existing development opportunities. Submitter Humphrey Tapper raised some concerns here. So map 5 is made up of the elements of maps 7, 9 and 10, being the hazards overview, strategic infrastructure and environmental areas. These are existing constraints to land development, and there are some controls already in the district plans that exist now for a lot of them. So the pre-existing development duties remain unchanged at this point in time. That there's been a recommendation also that map 5 be changed from areas to protect and avoid to key constraint areas, to indicate that in their delivery or implementation of other processes, they're not necessarily locked into that particular wording, that there'll be other considerations. One recommendation we have made around this is the accuracy of map 5. It does appear that some elements of map 10 in particular haven't come through on it, and they're just small stream areas in Selwyn and some open space, and some small stream areas in Waimakiriri as well that unfortunately were missed, and we recommend that those are bring forward to make sure that the elements on maps 7, 9 and 10 are shown in their entirety. It doesn't remove those areas are already shown on those maps as constraints. It just haven't been carried forward to this consolidated version.
42. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think the way you've done this reporting is fantastic. It's really clear, particularly the new things coming in with the yellow highlighting, and it just picks up these inconsistencies. So it's good to know you've done a check on those. Any questions? No, we'll move to the next. Nicole. Yeah.
Brought up before I worked out last week. The next one I was involved in the hearings that had bird strike for our district plan hearings, and still to confirm about this. This is more general that they're talking about.
I think, Nicole, your role is looking at the general content of the spatial plan, not specifically around those general topics.
Yep, which is good. That's what I think as well, but I thought I should still mention it because it's one of the appeals.
Yes. Okay.
Currently in process.
So the next question was around the 26 around the views of the bird strike area. Again, this is just a summary. There's more detail when the officers reply, but do not consider it needs to be included. It's probably better managed through the district plan processes. It does have some provisions in the city plan already around protecting it within 3 kilometres, which the 3 kilometres is shown there in the image. That's not pulled from the district plan. That's just some work we did in the background to give an indication of where 3Ks may be. it would be a relevant consideration in developing the blue-green network. Obviously, as that looks to enhance water spaces and green areas, that bird strike will have to be considered as part of that. But that there are considerations and processes in the district plan reviews for Selwyn and Waimakadere.
Okay, we're happy with that explanation. Thank you, Ben.
Just another one around clarity on map 5, a question here, and how the interrelationship constraints with the other maps, which I've probably already touched on, and where what map 5 is made up of. It's a collective view to inform the preferred growth at a high spatial level for the district plan. So it's a information gathering exercise. Again, we've recommended that the name of the map be changed to key constraint areas, and that future plans will have regard to the map, but more up-to-date information may come along that may change that. And that very much relates to the recommendation under question 17 as well, around having to update map 5.
Can someone tell me where map 5 is? And here we go. So that's right. That's good. Key constraint areas. So we've got rid of the avoid, protect type language in these areas from all of the spatial plan. Is that just triple checking? Is that those areas protect and avoid, they go to part 2 of the RMA? They have very specific meanings in law. I can understand why you've taken them out, which I think is the right move for me personally. But has those words also been taken out? Have you done a check of their appearance throughout the balance of the plan? Yeah,
Look, there have been in other areas where it's occurred. We changed it to avoid or manage, for example, yes, just to get that flexibility.
Yeah, you've done the old Control F. Yeah.
I just add one of the other rationales for changing map 5 to key constraint areas is in the requirement for the MPSUD and what we need to spatially identify. It uses the wording any constraints. So and as this is informing map 14, there's also detail in the officer's report that it's to reflect that requirement and the wording of the MPS.
Yes. So very wise change. Thank you for picking that up and recommending that to us.
There's another question later on around carefully managed, which has a similar response.
Yes, I've seen that. That's something we'll have a chat about.
So next question, so on this theme of opportunity 2, around how the ONLs are shown in map 10 and translated to map 5. So the outstanding natural landscapes are one of the GIS layers included under the protected places, landscapes and features in the legend. So it's a collection of a lot of those things. The outstanding natural landscapes, or similar across the 3 districts, were combined together and referred to as natural landscape in that legend. And map 5, given it's made up of the elements of these maps, that orange space reflects those ONL extents, as well as a lot of the other elements listed in the legend on map 10.
Does that answer your question?
Well, I suppose I would interpret a bit of a difference between ONLs and other natural landscape, in that the ONLs are in part 2, and to does doing that diminish the importance in the constraints side of things?
How hard would it be to identify ONLs as a specific layer on this plan, Ben?
It probably wouldn't be that difficult. We could pull that natural landscape layer out as a separate. It may, I don't know what it looks like when you start to translate over all the other layers, but you could.
Well, what I'm thinking about for this plan in particular, and I agree with Grant, and planning law and practice, ONLs have a very high level of word protection, whereas there's another range of other areas that when you're making decision making, they're different. So if there could be a way of having in the key in the planning map another colour to show the ONLs, that would be helpful, we think, for interpretation, Grant.
Yes, I think it would be. It would definitely say what the level of distinction between the level of importance of it as being a constraint.
Yes. Just fuse the other planners. Is that something that accords with your practice as well?
Yeah, I think that we could do that quite easily.
Yes.
It makes sense
Yes.
to it.
Cool.
It just is that we could do it quite easy into the map. I just don't know what that will look like in terms of our discern between. So it'd be for the map producers to try and find a way to make that clear.
Well, I think you're dealing with blues and greens there. There must be another colour you could.
Yeah, they just might overlap. That's all quite because quite a lot.
I'm just, if it looks like it's too complicated, could you pick out a little insert and just put a little box to the side at a scale that's readable?
Yeah, no, that's great. We'll talk with how we might be able to show that in the map. That's fine.
Yeah,
good point, Grant.
So it's a ways and means. So will you come back to us with some further advice on that?
Yeah, as mentioned up front, sorry, in the report, there are still some maps under development. We'll just incorporate that into and provide they're very close to being completed.
Yes.
It won't take long to do.
Thank you. Panel happy? Moving to question 1 now.
Right back to the start. Under the theme of managed retreat was around where that Waimakere and Selwyn were at in relation to the coastal hazard adaptation. So the councils are currently in the early phase of their adaptation work. They're obviously gone through district plan reviews at varying stages, addressing natural hazards. Councils have collaborated with Environment Canterbury to complete the Canterbury Climate Risk Assessment published in early 2022. Councils continue to contribute to that collaborative regional work under the Canterbury Mural Forum and as part of the project team in preparing Canterbury Climate Partnership Plan. The council still await clear national direction on roles and responsibilities, frameworks and funding models, hopefully signalled in the forthcoming Climate Change Adaptation Act, should it arrive.
Yeah, this is a very dynamic space for all councils. So I think that summary is pretty clear. So Ben, in terms of the Canterbury Climate Risk Assessment, was that a mapping process, or was that just one of these things where you had high, low, medium risks and were there mapped areas?
Yeah, there are maps, but it's a regional scale. So that from my reading of it, which was some time ago, so might be incorrect with the terminology, but I think it's subclimatic zone. So they look at the plains, the coast as broad areas and the associated risks and the priority risks to take through to adaptation planning.
Yes.
But it's not it's at that regional scale. So obviously much broader than Greater Christchurch, particularly broader than DAs. So it'll need more focused work for place-based adaptation planning, which I think is where Selwyn and Waimakere are starting to look at.
Yes, and certainly for our draft spatial plan, you've got all the up-to-date hazard information that the councils are have at their disposal. So you've replicated that here as the latest information.
Yeah. Forms the spatial plan, correct?
Any questions? Okay, we're making good progress after a slower start, but this is really helpful. Thank you. We're going to 25.
Yeah, so that was a white quiet word. speaker on. Although there are hazards in the area, there's still potential for future development. Officers have made a recommendation to indicate that these hazards could be avoided or mitigated to reflect that development does occur in natural hazard areas, but can be mitigated, and that's happened in other areas. The land in question is still to go through an RMA rezoning plan change. That's just a future urban area at the moment, and it'll be up to that proponent to provide information, demonstrate how that would be, how the hazard could be avoided or mitigated for the land to be rezoned. I've butchered this last bullet point, but we note that the submitted momentum did present some information on issues in relation to that land and how it could be overcome.
I've got a broader question. Kaiapoi, when you do look at the summary of constraints, maybe we should go and have a look at map 5, which is the summary. We could do that. Thanks, Kathy.
41.
Okay. So it's really like we've heard loud and clear in the spatial planning advice that Eastern Christchurch is subject to significant constraints and it's not a priority growth area, it's a priority area. Just really looking for advice from the council team, given the mapping and the constraints around Kaiapoi, what's the difference? Why does Kaiapoi get in and East Christchurch not?
So why is Kaiapoi given?
It's identified as a future.
Oh, because it's a greenfield space outside the urban zone. So the submission, the points relating to that, the slide's gone, but the green hashed area to the side of Kaiapoi, as to why it's a future urban development area. So it sits outside of it. The reference to Greater Christchurch is, well, that's within the existing urban areas. So it's not a future urban development area, which generally means it's growth, expanding the urban area.
Okay.
So that's future urban areas will be your greenfield locations.
Do we understand, panel? I'm just trying to. There is quite a long answer about why the east is a priority area rather than a priority growth area. Just to double check, Kaiapoi is not a priority growth area?
No, it's not identified as a priority development area in terms of the tools of the Urban Growth Partnership. It is an area still to growth, and it has indicated some growth direction.
Yes.
I mean, that growth area that's identified is also on the current RPS, and that's probably an issue that it's been there for a while.
Yes.
But like you, it'll have to go through a resource management process. But the multiple hazards there are significant. And I suppose that those issues will be covered in that process. I mean, the developer who submitted talked about the land being built up 1.6 meters, which sounds extraordinary. Yeah.
Just what I was saying, just in relation to that Kaiapoi relationship with Eastern Christchurch, it was they are similar. I guess they are similar elements to it in terms of the issues, and although that's acknowledged, there's a regeneration in locations in Kaiapoi is more advanced with coordination already. Hence why it wasn't put forward as a priority area. There are processes, business as usual processes in place that are quite well advanced to deliver on Kaiapoi generally as a in terms of its growth. Hence why it wasn't a priority area, even though it faces some of the similar issues that Eastern Christchurch faces.
So I was on a briefing on Tuesday. Kaiapoi's got major issues, including existing urban, and if you take out one of the houses on a tacky street, it's got to go up 1.6. So there's the big issues in urban Kaiapoi, let alone the greenfield space. But as I said to Tim Carter when he was here, you can engineer anything. My partner and I are currently building at Waikuku Beach, and we've had to go up a minimum of 153. So I'm going up 2 to make a basement. So there's significant challenges across the board. And I'm sure some of those also apply in Selwyn Coastal and what have you. So, yeah, but I don't know that it needs to, because we all know this. So you'd agree with that?
Yeah, and lifting land is not the only option. You can lift the houses as well, like you've just mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, that's been a useful discussion. The Kaiapoi is not a priority development area or a priority area, but there are some opportunities within the current urban area for further development. That's the summary.
That's the summary that's indicating, yeah.
Okay. One of the reasons it's not a priority development area or priority area is because of the hazard. It's identified, I presume.
Yeah, it just didn't need to be elevated to that level that required further greater partnership or further investment.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Those Ms. Aston's ones for the Prebbleton.
Okay, so
Question
what's
8.
the next question we're going to?
Is it
Question 8 around the Prebbleton. There were submissions recommending Prebbleton for growth. Have you, the officers, recommended changes to accommodate this?
I think perhaps this one going still in the back row. Yep. Just sat back from the table. Right. It's question 8.
Yeah. So there were some submissions, as you would have heard, for growth around Prebbleton. The officers have not recommended new greenfield areas be identified in the spatial plan, and that position remains unchanged. Officers in regard to Prebbleton, they have recommended that the spatial plan be amended to recognise Prebbleton as a locally important urban centre in town. And the orange dot you see in Prebbleton, that's the recommended change there that's come through on the maps that you have in your markup version. That orange dot wasn't there previously notified.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a response.
Yeah, already.
Any questions?
The green hash, that's in the RPS, is it? Already, it's
Yeah, they're the it's the infrastructure boundary identified within the RPS.
thank you.
So for the most part, there are elements that, for example, when the recent council plan changes from Selwyn, they're identified there in green hash with some of the grey under it. For example, the bits around West Melton, they're new, not in the RPS, and the area to the north of Rolleston, also plan change, and some of those areas around Prebbleton. So no, in the context of Selwyn, not all those areas reflected. The area around the south and southeast of Rolleston, that is the infrastructure boundary for Rolleston, but there are other areas that have improved in recent plan changes that are beyond that map. Pretty much everything else in Selwyn that you see with a green hash over it, whether it's grey or otherwise.
Happy to move on, panel. Let's go to the next question. Question 11.
Is reverse sensitivity addressed? So the office had made a recommendation for to add a new direction to opportunity 5 and some accompanying explanation text. The direction there is it's 5.4. Urban growth occurs in locations that do not compromise the ability of primary production activities to expand and change, including adapting to a lower emissions economy. So that just seeks to provide some balance between the urban growth and that protection of the rural area around food production, quarries, those sort of things that do occur in that area that will be important for Greater Christchurch's growth, recognising those. So it's a balance both ways on urban growth being protected as well as the primary production, noting that reverse sensitivity is where sensitive activities encroach on already existing incompatible activities.
77. Thank you. There's quite a lot of new text there, panel, which we've seen before. So that was in the original officers' recommendations. Any questions on this one?
So part of the original sort of idea of this particular reverse sensitivity was a two-way thing. So that encroachment in urban development wouldn't occur, or there'd be issues to protect the highly productive land, but conversely, expansion of rural activity that impinges on the urban environment that's already existing. Does this adequately deal with that?
And I guess that is focused on the protection of the existing rural activities. So I guess expansion of rural activities would be subject to the matters in the current district plan. So there, for example, quarries have they've set back the aspects to it in terms of if they are expanding, what's the impact on residential, and that would apply to many other rural activities too. There'll be a consideration of impact on urban or residential areas that exist in district plans.
But it could be in a reviewed RPS as well. An RPS could, because I know there's lots of discussions in Environment Canterbury about those kind of issues of odour, dust, and all that sort of thing. So that would potentially shape this as well.
There would be often a lot of that discussion around how they impact urban areas, and that will come up in the RPS for sure. This is about also recognising and going the other way. You need to protect that land production as well. Okay.
Grant, do you think we need to do some more in this space as a panel? I know it's an area that you've raised questions about a number of times.
Well, probably, whether or not because it's a spatial plan looking forward, I'm not so sure whether the district it's the reliability of the district council and the regional policy statement to actually take those things into consideration. And we haven't really flagged both of them together, the issues of setbacks and I don't know the key issues in that. And would it be useful just to flag it so that it's more than just the productive?
And we've had submissions and evidence on this. So I think, Liz, we should just flag this as a deliberations matter to come back and talk further about the specific wording and whether we might like to see some additional wording coming through from our recommendations.
Yeah, I think so. Just to sort of think about that, how you could, how could we achieve both consideration of both going forward a little bit more than the district planning process.
Any comments from the officers? No. Any comments from you about that being a problem?
Not a problem. Just trying to sort of be helpful and think where that might be helpful for the panel to consider where that might sit within the plan.
Yes.
There is the green belt concept, I guess, in terms of providing for that. It's probably going the other way though.
It's described as a buffer, and that could work two ways. And obviously, that signaled as work to come. So it just means to consider is that role of the green belt.
Yes. Could the officers just have a think about that as a supplementary matter that you could give us some advice on after hearing our questions and Grant's view that we do feel we perhaps need to clarify this slightly?
Yeah, so how the urban environment is protected against rural expansion, basically.
And other activities. You know, I don't know whether Tammy's able to check in with Environment Canterbury just to see what, because we have had lots of discussions on it. Is there some wording that might come out of preliminary stuff that we're doing?
Yeah. Definitely well addressed in those other documents, but we'll have a think about how that could be worded in court here.
That would be really good, and just give us some advice under a supplementary little paper. And it'd be
we circulate the updated maps and legal advice. We can
add that
hopefully before you actually might do that beforehand. We'll put some thought to that.
That'd be great. So Tammy and Grant, you obviously there's a lot of discussion about this at the regional council, so that's good. Thank you. Moving on, question 12.
Yeah, so moving into some of the MRT questions, there's a few of these. The first one was asked to look at the proposal put forward by Joe Davies and Brendan Hari, which this images caught there was primarily around the heavy rail track and protection of it. The existing heavy rail will remain an important part of the transport system, particularly freight. However, in the time horizon of the spatial plan, there won't be the growth necessary to justify that second corridor beyond the preferred MRT route. Subject to funding and approvals, Wahaka Tahi will seek to protect that MRT preferred route. The spatial plan seeks to be intentional and directed about where growth should go over the next 30 years, and that is focused around that preferred MRT route, particularly for intensification through the city. Without the certainty of growth to support another corridor, it may undermine the direction of the spatial plan by indicating something else. The spatial plan outlines a preferred pattern of growth and indicates areas for future development for business and residential areas, broad locations, including the priority development areas, and then to say that another layer of protection and that may undermine that direction and provide uncertainty as well. So recognising that the spatial plan looking out to 1 million people has provided a preferred urban form that can cater for that. So you start to add a kilometre around each side of the corridors. That's quite an expansive population then to also be considering, and we've got to, I guess, be more focused on what areas we look to protect and focus the development to.
I'll kick off by just, we heard quite a bit of evidence from a lot of passionate people about this issue of use of the existing rail corridor. I think there's two issues here that this plan raises for me. One is the future protection of the existing rail corridor through designation and maintenance of its ability for the future to be a service corridor. And the second thing raised in this submission was about looking at some sort of growth locations either side of the existing heavy rail corridor. So I think there's two issues at play here. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, and the current corridor is designated. Not sure how wide it exactly is, and then the secondary point is what do you do beyond that to protect for development? Yeah.
Look, I think I won't speak for the whole panel, but there's a feeling from me that existing heavy rail network is a real asset for Greater Christchurch. Looking out towards the 1 million population, could it have a part to play in moving people rather than freight? And is there anything that the spatial plan might do to signal that as an asset that should be preserved, thought about into the longer term, post 700,000? And if so, are the current designations wide enough to double track, for example? But that's just my initial commentary from what we've heard. And I'll be certainly the panel will have their own views. So Victoria.
Some clarification from you, Stephen. Are you thinking from the outer reaches of Hornby South and Belfast North, or are you actually thinking even further in?
Well, not necessarily further in. I'm not sure. Yeah, we've had, there are questions about connectivity between the MRT as identified and location to the existing rail tracks. So if people were in the long term being able to use a rail corridor coming from the extremities of the spatial plan area, or maybe even further afar, could there be a interchange switch over? But I've certainly had a long career in planning and strategic protection of future infrastructure. You only get certain chances to do that.
We could just get some comment about the indicative timelines for the second stage of the MRT, because I know at the moment the business case is concentrating on the inner city from Papanui to Central to Hornby, and that the next part of it that we're referring to primarily, I think, I'm just keen to, someone can remind me what the time frame is when that may or may not be considered. Because it strikes me that the issue we've got is we've got increasing numbers happening out on the fringes already, and they will continue to grow, and that is where the need is for the, transport coming into the city. So it's almost as if it's asked about face.
Emma will just look up that phasing, but I guess the point of focusing internally from city out to the Papanui first is to generate that feasibility, the capacity to get those stages going. That doesn't occur. It's just not dense enough in Rolleston and Ringaroa to do that. And so it's incrementally as they build along and enhance it, that becomes more and more feasible when you get to phase 3 at one point, maybe. In the meantime, it's recognised in the spatial plan that enhanced PT is required to connect those regions to the city and to the first few phases of MRT as well. So it's not being ignored. It will be improved as MRT is developed, and that will happen incrementally as and when it becomes more feasible. I'm just looking at Emma, got any timing on that phase 2 business case?
Okay.
I seem to recall seeing it somewhere in the GCP. We've seen a timeline somewhere. I just can't recall it.
Yep. So let's just hold. Emma's looking, but if you don't have the answer and you have another question, Grant, let's go with that.
I was just agreeing with you, really, that there's an opportunity here to strategically, ensure what is the ability to double track along that route that's shown pretty much on that plan, because on question 22, where the Canterbury Regional Transport Committee are looking at the feasibility, for example, of the future connection with Amberley and Timaru. And one of the issues that the MRT project picked up was that where the current heavy rail track comes through the existing urban area, that where the stations, if there are stations that could be located on that, what is the protection of the environment around those potential station points if a heavy rail solution ever went ahead? And I think, to my mind, it's valuable to not forget about that now. As you say, you've got a strategic issue that's flagging it now as a corridor that is wide enough to double track for sure, but also consideration at some point of and I think it's already done actually in the MRT project of where perhaps stations could go. Well, there has been some work in one of the optioning solutions for heavy rail versus the MRT, and I think in one of them is, the issue was from the heavy rail station locations, how do you get people into the central city? But that's an issue that could be developed as part of urban fabric later on. But I don't think we should discard that now. My feeling is that we should flag this, get a wee bit more work on it, and ensure that it is protected for at least for double tracking and potential station locations. And like you're saying, that in the future, if there is a station and there is development that takes place for residential or whatever near those stations that are outside the current thinking, then that's something that could happen later.
Well, it's a strategic plan.
Yeah.
We can make recommendations as a panel if on the evidence and the advice we have, we think it's wise to reference the opportunity. And in future planning, particularly designations undertaken in future district plans, would need to be mindful that the spatial plan is keeping that in mind as a potential not to be lost.
Yes.
Yes, Kate.
Yeah, it's along those lines, because I think, Chair, we heard quite a few submissions about that area south of Morehouse Avenue, like SOMO or something people were calling it.
Mm-hmm.
And, on the face of it, if you were going to think about the areas that are going to thrive or potentially develop from the Christchurch CBD outwards, you've got an area that's got a heavy rail line going right the way through it, and a connection to many of the arterial roads. So, and I understand that rail line is used for freight and, is an ideal opportunity. You couldn't script it better, really, if you were going to bring people in from Rolleston on that line.
I know it's an old chestnut that transport planners and around Christchurch have been thinking about for a long time. It's a bit like, in my mind, the intensification plan changes. You don't have to do it, but identifying and enabling in strategic planning documents is a different thing to requiring it. I've got a question just about the double tracking issue. Having lived and worked in Wellington for a long time, I'm aware of the Marston connection to Wellington. Is that on a double tracked? No. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Can we get some clarification around the existing designations, please?
I think that would be helpful. Just to see that it doesn't really matter for our exercise, because we can't require designations to be had, but just knowledge about whether there's width and key locations for the use of some or all of this heavy rail, if that's a constraint.
Yeah, so we can provide some information around the areas that are protected, the width. There'll also be provisions with the district plan that protect noise as well for development, that gives it a bit more depth in its protection.
Yes.
And I understand perfectly well the point you're raising and discussing here that don't want to forego these things or undermine them. I just that there's that business case which has had the opportunity, looked at those options and focused on that corridor that you have in the spatial plan. I guess that's the focus of the spatial plan and trying to achieve and invest in those areas to bring that along.
Understand.
I guess it's caution that in wording or providing that other opportunity doesn't undermine that and provide confusion.
Understand that. Yep. It has to be carefully done. And we've got Chris, sorry, wanting to say something. Can't remember.
Mark Stevenson.
Mark, sorry, Mark. Did you want to add something in here?
Yeah, just Ben Rhodes, the comment he's just made, I reinforce heavy rail certainly has been or is to be investigated in more detail as part of the MRT business case, and the findings of that will be pivotal, obviously, for planning for future growth. The other point I'd make is that along the current heavy rail corridor within the city, there's a large area of industrial zone land which provides a significant quantum of the sub-region's capacity for logistics and other activities, and there's been investment in sidings associated with that. So if the heavy rail corridor was identified, recognising the deliberations of the panel, it potentially also requires consideration of what change would be required in land use around that in order to provide the population base to support that, and in doing so to consider where any capacity for industrial and warehousing and logistics is accommodated if it were changed in terms of its land use.
Yes. Thanks, Mark. I think that's good. Grant?
Yes, I see it, protection as a transport route and a connection point and interrelationship between the MRT and the identified urban growth areas within the city along the MRT and the core transport routes. I don't necessarily see all of that proposed route or designation, if it happens in the future, as being available for residential development, but simply a conduit and corridor to get people from A to B through the city and alongside the city.
Given all of the climate change issues as well, we're going to be living in a very different world in 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Nicole?
I support what Grant's said. I mean, hearing what the submitters said, and they're talking about 500,000 is where a number of these European towns and stuff started before they had their various MRT options that they had, and now the size that they've got, and they've had that intensification that we need. And I grew up in Auckland, and I just see, I mean, there was a really lost opportunity there, and they're trying to retrofit into that. I think we need to, considering what we're doing, planning for the future, I think we really need to properly look at this as an option.
Yeah, I'm really mindful of the number of car trips and movements. I'm at an age and stage where we've got lots of friends and family who are living out in these areas that are growing, who have got children in school in town, and who are also working in town. It's that bit that I'm mindful of most, and picking up on what you're saying, Grant. It's about the connectivity. These aren't mutually exclusive, the MRT and the heavy rail corridor. It's about finding a way to see if it can work together, and we've got a corridor, and we don't want to cut our nose off to spite our face. We don't know what all the answers are yet. There's work still to be done in that space. We just have to make sure that we're not ruling things out.
If I could just add to that as well. When I looked at the question 22 and saw the business cases there, what occurred to me is, and I know this is a major concern to think about, it seemed to me that a lot of the cases were based on no, don't do that because it's mainly about cost. And I think that we need to be mindful, and I agree with everything everybody said. No, we need to be mindful. We might be sitting here thinking about 30 years, but it's actually past 30 years what that rail corridor could do. And so I think that it is really important that we could look at that, because even though we're only talking 30 years, it's going to make a massive difference for a lot longer. And I just wonder, is there any way that we can, I know that detailed business case is still to happen, and I don't know, is there a way for us to feed in something, even if we can't put it in the spatial plan? Screen eyes.
I mean, because on that point, the recommendation from this panel could go beyond just making specific changes to the plan. It could put recommendations back to the partnership, as the officers have done in their report as well. They sort of alluded to what else could be done outside it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. That's a good point, because we'll be looking at the document itself, but we have a recommendatory role where we could put forward some other suggestions.
So many submissions, and we've heard so much that
yes,
is maybe not within the scope of the spatial plan, but still nonetheless important that
yes,
the partnership can be made aware of.
And the fact that it's already been considered as an option in the comparison of the MRT versus the heavy rail, and its only cost and feasibility in terms of as an urban growth. But if it's taken, so there's work been done on it already.
Emma, is there any other advice you could give us, or any thoughts listening to the discussion?
Yeah, I guess going back to the timing question,
Is there a speaker button?
Oh,
yeah,
I think it's on. We're just too far away.
Yeah.
On the timing question, there's kind of three key horizons, and that first one is that detailed business case stage, which is yet to kick off and would be possibly a 4 to 5 year process. And then the next stage would be approximately kind of out to 2028 with the detailed planning and design, and the third horizon being the construction to 2033, and that second phase extension would be around then. I think on the kind of wider recommendations, I think can kind of only really speak for Waka Kotahi, but I think the other partners involved in the MRT work would be really happy to continue to receive direction from the spatial plan. I think a benefit of doing the IBC at the same time as the spatial plan was that we got that really good direction, and the timing was actually really well lined up, and now we can go do that detailed work. I think, I just echo some of the stuff that's been said, that we've done some work. I don't think anything has fully 100% been ruled out, and the heavy rail corridor is an important transport corridor, and the role of that will continue to evolve as the population increases and changes, and the future of Christchurch changes. I think for Waka Kotahi, we have a lot of confidence and I guess buy into the spatial plan and this MRT corridor, especially the turn up and go aspect of it, and the intensification, as well as the wider PT futures, just bus, direct and express connections. We have a lot of confidence in that plan and the spatial plan, and seeing these two things come together in an integrated way is extremely beneficial for us.
It's certainly a great process. Like, I think it's a special process where government, having stood back from planning for a long time, is now really involved and interested, not interested, don't take it the wrong way, but involved and thinking about these large urban areas and how they could work together. I'm under no illusions that the importance of the spatial plan is going to be quite far-reaching, because doing a lot of decision making myself in RMA processes, these strategic spatial documents are fundamental, because you need something to build on, and going through this very thorough consultative process with the community on the spatial plan gives us and having submissions and the hui mai gives us a lot of information. So I think, panel, we are agreed that we will be thinking about how the strategic corridor of the heavy rail network might just be able to be identified as a strategic transport route for the future. And that, Mark's point about it's important that the focus is on the MRT in the short to medium term.
Yeah, I think that's in that kind of integrated way, the benefits of this transport investment are really, really dependent on the growth and the urban
so it's
development.
a chicken and egg, but we don't want to
it's kind of
throttle the chicken in the meantime.
It's an interesting investment where we've gone a bit
Robbie,
broader than transport.
Well, I'm just wondering, Stephen, how are you going to introduce, because this is important, how are we going to introduce that into the spatial in the timeframes that we've got?
Yes,
that's my concern. We were talking about next week, which I'm unavailable for as well, and I'm just because this is important, and if we need to push out, we need to push out.
Robbie, I think we've got another day of deliberation on Monday. Are you not available? Sorry, it's a
Monday's fine.
Monday's
It was
fine.
the Wednesday you mentioned.
Thursday was really just to talk about the legal opinion and just probably an hour team session at some stage. But just for this is part of our feedback and deliberations. It's all open. I think we need to identify that the panel is interested in looking at how the heavy rail network, which is a transport asset, might be able to be. I'm thinking about just some wording changes and maybe a mapping change, and we'll talk about that when we finish this Q&A, how that might be able to be achieved. Panel comfortable with that? Yeah, and also, we're pretty committed to moving through our program and getting our report done in the next week or two. At the moment, I'm satisfied that through the process, we should be able to get there on a best endeavours basis. If there's something that really worries us, we'll talk back to Tracy, but that's where we're at.
Yep, thank you. Just in relation to that designation aspect, look at the Selwyn version, for example, it's 40 metres wide, so it's quite substantial. Not sure what it is in the city or going to Waimakariri, but that designation, that corridor is protected at 40 metres at least,
yes,
which is quite significant.
I think that information would be useful to us to be able to say, look, we do have designated corridors that have scope, and there'll be a lot of designations around the rail yards and things, I would have thought, the New Zealand NZR designations. So in terms of stations and other things, maybe the designation plans for the 3 TLAs, we can look them up on ourselves on the planning maps, I know. Just get a feel. Grant.
I just look at that map that we've got up there and thinking of how we've identified broad spatial requirements for future growth. You could do a similar thing for what we're talking about now, using that in some form. It could be a whole lot of dashed lines or something very simple graphically to say this is a corridor that needs to be protected, and simply not getting into too much detail, but simply a very spatial, broad direction to be considered in the future. And you could, mention the reasons why: double tracking, stations, access, integration, those sort of words. In a planning sense.
I agree. It's but we've got a timing issue about production of new plans and those sort of things. So it comes to the reality point that Robbie raised.
Yeah.
So we'll either through the offices, or if you can't put it together for us, a table with sort of general widths and opportunities for the current rail designations. That would be good to give us what you can. I know it's a holiday here tomorrow, but we can also have a look on Monday when we're back as a panel. And I was just thinking aloud, for the deliberations on Monday, the officers aren't with us. As we look at particular wording changes, and we'll be down into the detail of what we think we might be able to make some suggestions. Tracy, you'll be here, won't you? And if we do need access to some further support or information, we can. Liz, yes, okay. So we do have connectivity in my mind right through the officer team until we make our recommendations. So we'll just keep in touch for you, Ben, if there's anything else we need on Monday.
So just for clarification, in terms of the maps, you're looking at something supplementary that would support the identification of the rail corridor that's already on the GCSP maps?
No, I'm looking at the current designation widths in the district plans.
Yeah.
And if they are reasonably broad, just having that information, and then we might look at through some wording or some additional mapping, just identifying that broader rail corridor as a strategic. Yeah, so that might already be there, but
yeah, that's what I was just alluding to, is that the heavy rail is already on map 2, 14 and 15. So
yes.
So it's on the constraints map, and it's on map 5, map 2, map 14 and 15.
Can we just have a look at those, because that might already be there in the terminology.
So it's not the widths, obviously, it's the spatial.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would like to know the widths, because the practicality is no point sort of thinking about this as the designation's 10 metres wide and can't do anything anyway. So can you just take.
Which map? Have you got a page 79? That's the transport network. It's got the heavy rail on it. So it's constraint map
79 first.
79 first. 41.
Because I'm struggling with the court. So let's just start with this one. We've got the rail identified as heavy rail. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's it's just, that's just a fact. Doesn't identify as a strategic. It's just like it's there, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it map 9 as well?
Map 9.
Just while you're looking at that, although they are just shown on the maps there, and in protection there's a specific direction as well within the spatial plan to protect the effective operation of the freight network. So that would then relate to that map, and that would include the rail corridor. So it is a line that should be protected.
Yes.
What that looks like will be.
But for freight. So if we think it should be protected for potential future use for people as well, we could make some quite minor changes to reflect that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to raise in terms of Grant's point. I understand that, and that's at your discretion. It's just again going to harp back onto it that if you show them as broad locations, and it does broad locations for potential growth of people and housing, that really does sort of undermine that focus, preferred urban form. We've already shown broad locations to provide for that capacity. All of a sudden, you're starting to go, where are we going and what route? We've got 2 in the place. So I'm just really putting that
understand. We don't want to unravel the way it all hangs together. no, I've got that alive in my mind. Yeah.
Just
Right.
two things to pick up. I suspect that there's in the MRT, the big document, that there will be some text around the option, the
Yes.
heavy rail option and the
Yes.
station and what that involved.
Yes.
And I can't remember what was in that plan that we just had up there from the submitter, whether there was something in that they had been suggesting. So I can't remember. Anyway, that's you guys come back to us.
Yeah, so you'll let us know about the general widths, which provides the opportunity for Freight Plus in the future, and then we'll certainly have a look at these plans and make sure that if there's any further clarification or tweak, we might be able to look at that. Okay, panel?
Just a point of clarification, the widths of the existing rail corridor, because one of the reasons but in the mode screening of the interim business case or the indicative business case was the link to the city and where rail currently goes through. I'm just thinking back to the question from Joe and Brendan's proposal is about looking at that cut and cover and tunneling options for somewhere into the city, but you just want us to provide the widths of what's existing and not options for designating more.
I think just what's existing.
Yep, good.
And does the interim business case look at the rail track through the built up parts of the city and identify constraints, or I must admit
it's one of the reasons why
it's
one of the was discounted, because it goes through Addington, which is a long way to the west of the city. It didn't actually connect in versus the road. So,
Yeah.
it is one of the issues.
I suppose in my mind, I'm not thinking about this as a competitor to the MRT. This is an additionality that might be useful to flag as a strategic transport route for the future. Yeah.
It's also the other things that people were talking about using a rail, some sort of one that could do the MRT route with the rail route and lead from one to the other. I don't know what the potential would like at Hornby and such like. So there are other options that can be done as opposed to doing the heavy rail all the way into the city. If those were just from memory of what people are presenting.
Transition points.
Interchange.
Interchange points.
Yeah. So the current preferred option is to obviously have the MRT route and use the PT Futures kind of direct and express bus routes both to the city, but also potentially connecting to park and ride or multimodal stops at the end of the MRT. And the door is definitely left open once we get into the detailed design of the first stage of MRT to think about what the broader connections to the districts would look like in the future, especially once we start to see what the kind of future growth patterns of Christchurch look like, how much we realise the capacity within the city.
Emma, did I read in the responses to one of the questions that the terms of reference for the detailed business case is still in development?
Yeah, that's true.
Is there a draft?
I don't think so. I can't confirm. I haven't been involved in one. Wakatahi, I think, as I said, is doing some of the early work to feed into that, what the terms of the reference for the business case need to be, by looking at what some of those big questions are that we really want to see answered. And then once we've got that, it'll be around. But I don't think we have anything.
But again, a recommendation could be made to the partnership about this general issue about keeping options open, flexibility, opportunities, in terms of how the detailed business case looks at the interconnections.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be fine, and that would probably be a better forum to send that to be able to respond and address. Yeah.
Okay. This has been a good discussion. Is the panel happy to move on? Thank you.
Staying on the MRT discussion, that might be some overlap from that previous one. Question 13 was providing a view on the stabling areas provided David Ivory for the MRT. So the indicative business case, as Emma alluded to, was completed alongside the spatial plan to set out the case for rapid transit along the corridor. It assessed a range of routes and mode options, and how the project can be delivered and possible timing and staging. It did not go to the detailed design and delivery elements of the system. We would expect that to come through in the future detailed business case. Probably similar.
Well, it's exactly right. Like, I was quite interested in that submit. I can't remember who it was about, knowledge, and the one that's come from Hong Kong recently. David Ivory, okay. But thinking ahead about the opportunities with stabling, and that there seems to be land and, in his mind, some sort of logical area for that. But that is a DBC type matter. And again, we may well be able to respond to some of those good ideas coming through some submitters by this additional recommendations to feed into other partnership processes rather than just wording or mapping in the spatial plan. I think that reality of the different ways we can input in our recommendations has sort of changed things for me. You don't just have to focus on what's in the spatial plan wording and mapping. Yes.
Yeah, I think it brings together land acquisition issues,
Yes.
Interchange between the different modes of transport.
Yes.
And there are certain locations like Hornby where that everything comes together and they make logical spatial points, if you like.
Yeah, but that's subject to further, that's details, not our job to do that. But just flagging that that's the place where it could and should go in terms of process.
Yeah,
I think would be helpful. And that will help the submitters know we've listened and we've got a pathway to deal with those issues.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm mindful at 12:30. Was lunch at 12:30 or later on at 1? Okay, let's carry on.
Continuing on the MRT, questioning around why wasn't it extended to the east and what was considered there. So the preferred MRT option is based on a wide foundation of analysis of trends and projections of travel and growth of employment. Given the constraints and careful management of growth required in the eastern parts of Christchurch, any extension to the MRT system is unlikely to achieve that degree of urban form enhancements that supports that infrastructure. As I mentioned before, you're trying to generate a size and scale of development to improve the feasibility for MRT. The outcomes of the work we're focused on the opportunity to reshape the key centres and neighbourhoods to maximise those benefits. And that's the route, that's the preferred route there. Number of centres along the way, quite a lot of development, less constraints. There's knowledge that the public transport network needs to improve to service existing and future communities in the east, and that will expect that to come through in the wider PT Futures investment.
Nicole?
I question whether this is forward thinking enough, because I mean, any sort of route that you've got of MRT or something from what happens elsewhere is going to get intensification, and you'll eventually have it all the way along that corridor. It's, I don't know, it's chicken and egg sort of situation, I think, that we need to be looking at. I think we could be looking broader than what we have been.
I just would say it's not to say that intensification won't occur, it just won't happen at the scale. It'll probably occur as what's already provided versus the centres elsewhere could go a lot higher, would be the focus to generate it. So it's not saying that stuff won't occur, it's just going to occur in a business as usual over time as you'd expect, rather than the scale you would need to support MRT.
Okay.
I've got a question, and this also links in, but I'm aware that PC14 is very dependent in terms of its zoning along preferred and frequent public transport routes. And to me, one of the things that we consistently heard from submitters on this topic is that the transport to Eastern Christchurch is poor. And I think for us to justify that in the plan as a reason for not considering the future aspect is challenging. The reality is that there will be development within some of these areas where there are no significant constraints. And if people aren't seeing an improvement now, when are they going to see an improvement? So I think there are some real issues around this, and we heard it consistently.
Yeah, one of the other questions was asked around the indicative arrows of the core transport routes, which we recommended are extended to show where they actually do go. And the questions around MRT, and the answer is that it's not preferred direction. It's acknowledged that there will be enhanced core public transport to the east and elsewhere in Christchurch. I mean, the map 15, the one there in front of you, just shows the blue lines. That's one level of the transport corridors. There's a whole another layer below that. So it's just showing those core routes, knowledge that, and PT features and knowledge that's going to enhance over time. So we agree.
I'm not convinced that the transport routes to the east are poor. I know we heard from submitters, but I also recall one submitter who it was years ago that when she was trying to use buses, and I don't know whether, my recollection is not great, whether we asked her whether she'd tried to use a bus recently, but my understanding that there has been some improved connections out to the east already, and that there is, through the PT Futures program, further improvements. Can anyone comment on that from Grant?
Well, only in that there's a drive to improve, the whole PT Futures program, which is improving frequency of buses through those core routes, and the linking in with what we're doing here is really important to get that uplift. And I think it's working with Waka Kotahi and the other thing that's happened is some government changes in terms of the way the whole PT transport system is managed. There used to be, and there were restrictions previously on that in terms of funding. So it's kind of a funding issue more than anything. We're electrifying the fleet, all those sorts of things, but it is improving, and it has to improve for people to be able to be confident that they want to live there because they can hop on a bus and they'll be in the city in 10 minutes. So it's that whole 15-minute, 10-minute journey time. So, and that's linked into the spatial plan. So they're both, they're heavily linked. But, it's very clear that people were concerned that either the reality or perception is that it's not a good service.
I suppose there's a.
But I was going to say, but because of the PT, the bus public transport needs to lift its game. I don't think we're ready yet to consider a side route for MRT itself. It's a you'd have to have a considerable uplift to justify that.
As a visitor from Hawke's Bay, I had a good look around that whole area just to refresh myself. I sat on the IHP hearings 2014 when the district plan was reshaped, and aware of all the hazard issues. But one of the things that I observed is there's many very wide boulevards out towards the east. Very wide. It looks like there's areas, massive road widths, and probably in the day there would have been trams using some of those areas. What also strikes me is that the east is a key recreational area right across the breadth of recreation. Kids and people are moving out there for recreation. But I understand what Ben's saying about you don't want to dilute your investment in MRT by spreading it too thin. And you've got to focus on growth around some key spines where intensification will fuel better uptake of MRT use, and you can't do everything at once. So certainly to me, that eastern area, and maybe if we could have a look at the constraints map 5, which is on page 41, Kathy. If we could just bring that up. Certainly there's a lot of text or some text in the spatial plan that the east, because of its constraints around natural hazards in particular, shouldn't be looked at for a priority development area. Because of the earthquake, the reality of the earthquake. But when you look at this constraints map, that doesn't seem to be borne out. Can you comment on that, Ben, or the rest of the team?
I mean, there was a question and answer later on around that specific point around what does the development and priority development actually mean, and use as a tool to deliver on this. It has a specific meaning. It's not to say that no development would occur. You're right, and acknowledge in the answer to that eastern priority area question, it's the spatial extent is it's not well defined. There is a sort of a delivery of how do you help build resilience and the natural hazards, particularly you see there in the far east, but there's also other elements within that big blob that could be considered in terms of trying to enhance that area for a number of reasons. It is, I have to acknowledge, it's very well undefined exactly what that would look like, and it has to be worked through in the next phases of the priority area work. The reason that the word development has not been included in there is because priority development areas are a tool in delivering spatial plan and has a meaning in and around bringing on development at an increased scale, at speed, requires beyond business than usual approaches.
Yes.
But so that's the priority development areas, but there are also other areas that acknowledge that need to be, I guess, lifted up as a priority area as well, including the east and the Māori, the Kainga Nohonga for Māori reserves and in the urban area. So not to lose sight of them, but their focus is not that at speed, increased scale development to give life to the preferred urban form.
Okay, I see Mark's got some questions, but I'll follow up with a question for you. You're talking about the Far East, so we're dealing with New Brighton and the coastal hazards and the hazards around the estuaries off the Heathcote, Avon, and the red zoned areas which have been transitioned into more of a green space type area.
And so Mark probably looking to better answer that question.
But I'm interested in the Near East. Let's call it. If you talk about the Far East, I'm interested in the Near East.
Yeah,
and the big area of, well, just for me, looking at the planning maps and what's there, there's a significant area of current housing that's unconstrained that needs good transport, and is that being discounted from priority development because of something other than constraints?
No, it's probably that doesn't align with the. There was part of one of the areas considered as to there might be a priority development area,
Yes.
But one of the key things is that doesn't give it life to the sort of preferred urban form, and you can't even it can't be a priority. So
it
was
comes to
considered.
this point about you've got to prioritise
the priorities.
But if you put, say, if you took the Papanui MRT route off and put it out towards the east and prioritise that, there must have been. Did you go through an MCDA process to sort of work out where the two priority directions were?
Well, there was a process similar to that, but the indicative business case and the MRT route was sort of already the preferred route was there, and that was a key element of where you then might identify the priority development areas. If that was to go to the east, then that might bring that eastern area far more to the front in terms of the development aspect.
But that's not the preference
No.
of the spatial plan.
No.
And the reasons are because you're looking at a Mark, you go.
Just adding to what Ben said, the east is identified in the spatial plan. It's a large area, obviously, and there's parts of it which are identified at risk of coastal inundation and erosion over the long term from the effects of sea level rise. There is opportunities for intensification and growth in parts of the east, and certainly around centres, and that will be supported by investment in through public transport futures. That program of work has identified enhancements in terms of accessibility by public transport, and also I would add there's significant investment in cycleways, which also are proposed to extend to the east through the Otakaro Avon River corridor, and also you touched on the recreational value, the opportunities identified through a regeneration plan for what was the red zone and is known as the Otakaro Avon River corridor. So there's no doubting, there's no question there'll be investment, and that will improve accessibility, and that there will be growth. But recognizing that it is a large area, there is variation, and there are parts that are going to be less appropriate for growth beyond what's already enabled, and the council will be going through a future planning process to consider whether development rights as they exist now should be reduced in light of the significant risks having regard to Section 6, and we'll need to work through that. I would add also that the council is advancing adaptation planning process, which will work with communities in the east to look at how we adapt to the effects of climate change, and that will consider the appropriateness of and the appropriate response, including whether it's to retreat or to accommodate or to adapt in accordance with MFE's guidance around adaptation planning. So there's a range of things going on, as I've alluded to, and we just need to be cognizant of that without labeling it as growth. The risk of labeling it as a growth area is it signals a response that may not be appropriate in all areas, but it's still recognizing that it does require some attention and investment as well as partnership. So hence it's identified as a priority area.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mark.
Yeah, just following on from what Mark said, I think one of the obvious things about the east is that the housing stock out there is at a lower price point than some of the other areas that are along the MRT corridor. I mean, you take, for example, the Papanui area, as opposed to some of the areas out the east, and it's going to be a better price point for the developers to be developing some of the multi-units out towards the east before they do some of the ones in Papanui area. So I think, so it recognises that there will be development out there anyway. It is a conundrum, and I understand where Mark's heading, and I would be reluctant to change where we're sitting at already with this because of the complexity of all these other work programs that are going on.
Yes. I think this is an important discussion given the submissions we've had. And certainly Mark's explanation there is really helpful in terms of the future city planning perspective. I do note on map 2, in terms of the longer term future, that both Linwood, Shirley, and growth and intensification around those what I call Near East areas is identified. Yeah. Any other comments, Robbie?
Well, just again at our briefing on Tuesday, Al Blackie, a Kaipoi-based councillor, with regard to red zone at Karaki Beach, we gifted that to a trust. They have asked for expressions of interest on people who are prepared to move there. They've had 53 expressions of interest already, and that was in one day.
Yes, it's certainly a fascinating area from an overall strategic planning perspective. So many opportunities, but so many issues as well. But in terms of this plan here we're looking at now, the MRT, I think for me the officers have answered things pretty well, and I certainly understand there's a concept of limited good that some societies have, that you can't, if you take something from somewhere, you lose it from somewhere else. And there's only so much intensification that can drive effective MRT, and you need to focus it. This is the focus that the partnership has chosen. Yes.
Intensification will occur in other places, but it's a focusing the partnerships, investment and time and energy, I guess, to bring those along. It's not saying it won't occur elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
George has to leave, and I'm just mindful he's quite across that carefully managed question, and I just wonder if we can go to that now.
Okay.
Then come back.
Yes.
To that, yep. So that was question 5 in relation to protection of strategic infrastructure. How would hearings commissioners on a resource consent hearing respond to the term carefully managed? So the wording,
page.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Page 19. Yeah.
What number is it?
19.
19, sorry.
Question 5.
I said there was a change recommended from avoiding development around strategic infrastructure to carefully managing around strategic infrastructure. There were some submission points raised against that. The intent was to change the language from avoid to carefully manage to capture the broad spectrum of responses that could be applied in relation to development and strategic infrastructure. Again, along the lines of the changes around avoid or mitigate, but in this instance, a bit more of a broad spectrum. Carefully manage is intended to provide a strong degree of latitude for the wide range of management responses. In some circumstances, avoid may be appropriate. At the other end, it may be more managed in terms of like co-locating strategic infrastructure within urban development. So it's open for discretion at in implementation, but provides that flexibility beyond just saying it has to be avoided. That could be quite difficult in some circumstances.
For the planners in the room, these words, Janice and others, so we bounce around and plan review hearings and all sorts of objectives and policies about what's the appropriate use of these terms. And as I said before, they do have meanings in terms of how they've been interpreted from a statutory interpretation perspective. I can certainly understand why you wouldn't want to maintain avoid, because that's quite inflexible around some of these matters, right?
Yeah, that thought crossed my mind too. I if you refer it to other legislation and you use the word appropriate management rather than carefully management, it kind of has links with the coastal policy statement, all those sort of words that you either avoid or it's inappropriate or appropriate. Anyway, that's
it's also to say, I should have mentioned, we took the wording from the Spatial Planning Act, so that may in time, depending where that goes, that may come forward. And that's
The carefully managed comes from there, Ben?
Spatial Planning Act.
Yes,
Yep.
that's where it comes from.
Yeah, it's in there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think it's quite a good choice of wording. Personally, because I'm thinking about, I sat for 2 years chairing the review of the new Plymouth District Plan. Janice will remember some of those hearings, and a lot of discussion about what the essence of the policy framework needs to capture. And I would expect that the officers would have thought about this quite deeply about what is the appropriate words. And you're all in alignment that that term is the right term to use here. Janice, is there any?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we debated this quite a bit, but when you read it in the context on page 52,
yes,
there's not many words that we could put in there that do it better than carefully managed or appropriately managed.
Yeah.
It's got to be on that sort of,
yes,
away from avoid, you're looking at a range of appropriate managed or carefully managed, or some sort of management that says it's in some places that will be suitable to do development around the strategic infrastructure. In some cases it won't be.
yes.
So the void was too harsh, as you said.
Yes.
And so we had to find something that was more nuanced than that. So, you know, if there's a better word, well, you know, obviously we would think about it.
You would have done all your little thesaurus and and dictionary definitions. I know.
Happy to pass the buck to the panel to.
Look, I tend to like to delegate these things to other people to tell me what the right words are, but that does strike a chord with me as being an appropriate frame. Panel, are we comfortable with that?
It would be good to, I mean, will you have a definition within the document of what that's drawn from the Act? The definition in the Act is the Act's definition good enough?
Yeah, part of our discussion was, you know, borrowing from an act where that hasn't been tested through the courts yet. What carefully manages is troublesome. So we were looking at perhaps other options, but have management in there. Janice alluded to appropriately managed, but you know, carefully managed. Taking away that it was in the Spatial Planning Act seemed to be an appropriate, just from the plain order meaning of that there needs to be careful consideration. Place, space, and circumstance, and the infrastructure in question. Ben made a really good point that we wouldn't want to avoid growth around MRT, which would be strategic infrastructure. We'd actually want to actively co-locate growth, and so it's intended to give a really broad latitude of the management responses, and we did land on carefully managed in the end.
Nicole?
So I might have just missed that. Why was appropriate discounted, appropriately managed, as opposed to carefully managed?
It wasn't discounted. We just had a lot of discussion. So we talked about the approaches that a precautionary approach kind of alludes to being carefully managed, particularly in some of the areas where there'll be infrastructure in quite sensitive environments and at-risk environments, which I think some of the providers of infrastructure talk to in their submission points. So it's that careful. The idea is careful rather than appropriate. And I think Grant actually talked about appropriate and what's inappropriate in terms of that RMA language as well. So we decided careful.
Okay. Well, I think we've got the advice. It's had a lot of careful thought. The pun. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? We'll move on. And we're up to now, Ben. Question 16.
Question 16, which is around the regard had to MRT being extended to the airport and university. The airport link was considered with an option to UC in the IBC, indicative business case. and assessed under a range of criteria. The MCA found that none of those options provided overwhelming support across the investment objectives. On the presentation there, brackets. Airport is some of the other key influences for the viability included the ability to stimulate intensification as well, given the restrictions under the airport noise contours. University of Canterbury is a walking distance to that southwestern preferred corridor anyway, and there can be connections developed into there. And the airport is considered well serviced by existing and future committed public transport routes. And the preferred option does enable multimodal connections to the airport and university as well. And it's not precluded from the future from being considered in terms of expanded MRT.
Could we just look at the probably plan 2 again? So I can get some. Thanks, Tiffy. Okay. So I'm particularly interested in the comment that UC is walkable from, was it Riccarton? In your slideshow, what's it say?
You can see a symbol of the university, I think there between Riccarton and Church Corner.
Yes, but is it Riccarton where it's walkable from?
It Common Hab was walkable from that southwestern corridor, so it could be Church Corner in between Riccarton. But I've walked it from Riccarton.
Yeah,
I'd say it's very much walkable.
Yes,
and in my youthful days, it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning. I was stumbling a wee bit.
15 minutes.
I mean, corridor goes along and closer down Riccarton Road. You get to Island Road or the Clyde Road there. It's 5-10 minute walk up the road from there. If that from those areas, Riccarton's a bit further away, but the connections could occur anywhere along that route. And the option does include about that multimodal connections from the route to the airport in the city as well.
Any questions on?
It does look to be only roughly about 800 metres from the university to Church Corner. And it looks like there's an intermediate station somewhere along Riccarton Road before the mall. So you would assume that there might be a couple of stations that would be walkable.
Mark, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I can circulate a link to the panel of a map from the council's webpage, which shows a walkable catchment of 600 metres from Riccarton's commercial zone, which obviously doesn't show the exact distance to the university, but it does indicate it's in the vicinity of 800 metres as the bird flies.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could do that. Thanks, Mark. The university is quite a big campus. It depends on where you're heading, but yeah, I do know who've got people I know that go to the university and they're walking and biking all over the place as a preference. So it's part of the nature of that campus. Okay, thank you. Is this a good time to have lunch? Kate, or do you have a question, Kate?
Oh, just a very quick question. I just wondered what the full and frequency of the public transport routes we have are.
We've just had a rejigging of some of the routes, and we've got a new one, which is port to port, which goes from Littleton right through the centre of town and all the way up through the northwest Wairaki Road to the airport. It's number 8, and it's every 15 minutes. If that's any help, Grant, can you add to that?
Yeah, and I have a feeling that there are at least another, I think there are another 2 bus services that run in or near the university and then come out different ways.
Emma's nodding her head, so.
Yeah, I think what was the purple one, but it's now the 3 is probably about every 15 or 10 minutes, but PT Futures has that as one of the cool ones, being 7.5 minute.
Where's the pickup point from the airport? Is it right when you come out of the air terminal and it's right there? Because I come in quite a lot, so I've never observed buses waiting, not like Auckland where you get
kind
out.
of out. You kind of come out and leave. Yeah, it's probably not not as well signposted as other airports. I have to say that. Yeah, by
Because
the
if there was a
hotel.
15-minute route into town, I'd be jumping on it every time I come, but I just go to the Uber stand.
Pro tip, it exists.
It's tucked in behind the new hotel that's there, the multi-story hotel.
Okay.
So it's just the other side. So if you're walking out to the taxi stand, you won't notice it, but it's probably only another 100 steps from the taxi
It's
stand.
interesting, isn't it? Because oh, it's probably there, but it's, you know, probably as a litmus test, you know, unlike Auckland where you get out and the buses are sitting right there, it's a great service every 15 minutes, but it's
Yeah, here's the other taxis that take up the other room right outside.
yeah.
That's a good point.
Okay, thank you. Well, shall we break for lunch? It's 1 o'clock on the dot. We're back at 2 o'clock on the dot.
2 o'clock on the dot.
Sorry to be a.
Don't sit in the tea room.